Hello everyone, welcome to Pete's Diviner World. Today I'm going to be doing a video which I want to do for a while, but just want to go through the catalog again, and that's the ranking of all of the Who studio albums. So this is a tough sort of catalog to rank because a lot of their big hits, especially early on, were not on studio albums like Substitute, Join Together, Long Live Rock, things like that. So this is just based on their studio albums, and for a band that's been around for that long, they only have 12 studio albums, I guess, because there was a big gap between 1982 and 2006 or 7 where they put out Endless Wire. And even in the 70s, they didn't really put out that many albums. They have a lot of releases, but a lot of compilations, that sort of thing. So I discovered The Who around 1980 or so. I remember hearing the song You Better You Bet, so I became a fan then. Then when MTV came out, Face Dances and It's Heart were their newest albums out, so I became a fan really of that lineup a lot, because that's sort of when I discovered them, even though a lot of people hate that era of the band. And my ranking will sort of reflect that, I think, and people will be like surprised at some of my choices for how I rank these. But starting off, we're going to rank the album that they came back with, I believe this is 2006 or 7, that's Endless Wire. Like I said, they hadn't put out an album since It's Hard. They had started touring again in 1989 after a 7-year break, and toured throughout the 90s. They did a Quadrophenia tour. I saw them in 2002, where it was just a small 5-piece band. It was basically the Who and Pete's brother on additional guitar and a keyboard player, and it was only a couple days or maybe a week after John Entwistle died. So that was a great era also, because since then they've added like all these extra musicians and all this, and that's sort of like what's on here. It's supposed to be a concept album. I guess it's sort of loosely related to Lifehouse, which was what Who's Next was based on. I had a tough time ranking this one or another one lower, which was coming up next, because this one, although it sounds like the Who in a lot of places, because I think Zach Starkey's on drums on here, there's just a lot of the songs are just short little interludes, and there's a few main songs. I don't know. I don't really, I never took to a lot of these songs. The best songs on here, I think, are right in the middle, In the Ether, Black Widow's Eyes, 2,000 Years, and It's Not Enough was the first single released for it. That's not bad. But I think, you know, at some point, people just wanted to hear regular albums as opposed to rock operas and stuff. And that goes along with Pete's solo stuff, too. He put out a lot of, like, albums that loosely were based on stories like White City and The Iron Man, and then he put out Psychodelict, you know. So I think people just wanted more of a regular album, which they got right after this. I'm not sure what, this album came out a few years ago. It's just called Who. The thing about this album is it's a pretty solid album, and I remember listening to this a lot when it came out. Had it in the car for a couple months, and all the songs are good. They're all solid songs, but it just doesn't sound like the Who. To me, it sounds like a Pete Townshend solo album that Roger Daltry sang vocals on. And like, again, I'm saying all the songs are good, but Zach Starkey again doesn't play on this, I don't believe, or maybe only a couple tracks, so it's missing that feel that they have live. All This Music Must Fade is pretty good. Ball and Chain. Beads on a String. I'm surprised that song hasn't been in a movie, like in the ending credits or something like that. So, like I said, besides Endless Wire, I think all their albums are obviously solid after that. So it is tough to rank that way. Coming up next, might be surprised by this one because people love this album too. This is their second album, a quick one. And this is one of them that came out, I believe, in the 90s with all these extra tracks. But going up, just taking into account the original album, it's just, to me, a lot of the album is filler. And of course, you have the great quick one, While He's Away, mini rock opera, which is about 7 or 8 minutes long. And the other great song on here is So Sad About Us. It's sort of a lost single they had early on. Again, like I said, okay album. The problem, I think, with their 60s output is a lot of their great songs were released as singles, so they didn't make it onto their albums. And their albums have a lot of tracks that could have been big singles or live favorites, but they just never either played them live or released them as singles. So it's kind of like their first 3 albums before Tommy. I think they were just trying to find their way. But it's still worth picking up though. Next up, their final album before they broke up. It's Hard. I do like this album a lot. I think it's a little bit weaker than Face Dances. Athena was sort of a big radio hit. It's Hard was sort of a song they played live. Dangerous. Eminence Front was the big hit. That was all over MTV. It's been used in commercials. A lot of people say that this album sounds more like a Pete Townshend solo album. I don't really... If you listen to his solo albums at the time, I don't think this really sounds like his solo stuff. Still sounds like The Who to me. I liked Kenny Jones as a replacement. I think, especially live, they were always good live, and I think he did a good job on the albums. I think they, in the years following, Roger Daltry and maybe even Pete had sort of not blamed him for the breakup, but I don't think that was the case. I think they were just tired. And a lot of people say, oh, they've had all these farewell tours. They only had the farewell tour on here. Since they've gotten back together and started touring in '89, they've never broken up again. They've never said, actually, until recently, I think they're saying this is their last tour. But like I said, a lot of people hate this era, but I like this era a lot. Next up is their, people are going to be surprised I'm ranking this so low, but this is their second album, The Who Sell Out. And this is sort of, I guess they called it a concept album at the time because they have all these little radio jingles in between songs and things like that, which is kind of cool to hear once or twice, but it gets annoying with further listens of the album because those little commercials and things are not usually separated from the other tracks, so that, like, you can't just skip through them. You have to listen to them either the beginning or the end of a song. That being said, Armenia in the Sky, Armenia See It in the Sky, I don't understand how that was never released as a single or played live, or I can't believe it because it's such a great song. Other than that, I'm trying to think what was the... there isn't really too many big singles on here, again, because they were released independently of their albums. Tattoo is one of their big songs that's on here. Marianne with the Shaky Hands. There's also a bunch of bonus tracks on here too. Real and Real 2. That was sort of like a mini opera. I just never took to this album too much, maybe because I got it later on. It was like one of their last albums I had picked up to complete the catalog, but I know they put out this deluxe edition of this last year and people loved it. A lot of people say this is their favorite Who album, but definitely not one of mine. Next up, I'm going to rank the debut. I think it's a pretty good, solid 60s album. Doesn't sound much like The Who. This is them as an early British sort of pop band with a couple bluesy numbers on here. My Generation's on here. Kids Are All Right are on here. I'm a Man. Legal Matter is a pretty good single, or sung by Pete. The Ox is like this sort of bass instrumental thing. And this one's got an extra disc, the deluxe edition with a lot of the singles at the time. Can't Explain. Goods Gone, Legal Matter, a couple of different versions of or takes of My Generation, Anywhere, Anyhow, Anyway. So that's a classic cover right there too. Next one up, I think, is their most underrated album. Came out in '75, I believe. That's The Who by Numbers. And this is their first album since, I guess, well, a quick one that really isn't based on any concept. I mean, Who's Next was not a concept album at that point, but it was based, the songs were pulled from a concept album. And just a solid rock album. I believe this is the album where Pete said that he had some writer's block on. Maybe that's why it took a while to come out and before they put out another one. But this has a couple of radio hits that you still hear now and then. Slip Kid, Squeeze Box, Dreaming from the Waste. But the one song on here that a lot of people don't talk about, I think is one of their best ever, is How Many Friends. But this is definitely a good snapshot of them in the mid-'70s, how they sound. So definitely highly recommend that. Next up, just edging out a little bit, I think. Again, I think it's another underrated album of theirs, is Who Are You? The last one with Keith Moon. Pretty rocking album. There's not too many ballads or any slower songs. I think this is the first one where Pete doesn't sing a song on lead vocals either, I believe. Of course, everybody knows Sister Disco and the title track. Guitar and Pen, New Song are all pretty good too. So it's a pretty solid album. By this point, though, I think, ironically, they had already put it in Kenny Jones' ear about joining the band, but I think they ultimately decided to give Keith another chance, and the producer worked on him. It was a very laborious process for him to get the drums down, but I think he had become sober by the end of this recording and actually had died in some way from the medication to prevent him from drinking, ironically. But yeah, it's not an album people talk about a lot besides the title track, but I think it's actually a pretty solid album. And coming in at number 4, people I think are going to be surprised that I'm ranking Face Dances so high, but I think this is just a solid album from start to finish. Of course, You Better You Bet is on here. A lot of other really cool, catchy songs. Don't Let Go of the Coat, Catch Catch, The Quiet One, sung by John. Another Tricky Day, one of my favorite Who songs. Again, maybe it's just because of the era I discovered them in, but great. It's a great produced album too. I don't think a lot of their albums really sound that good besides like Quadrophenia maybe. I think a lot of their production has like a really almost flat sound, which you could argue why people think Live It Leads is their best album, because that's how they really sound live, or for at least that period. But if you've dismissed this album before, I think you should actually give it another chance. Coming in at number 3, just because you can't deny how good this album is, even though I'm completely sick of it, is Tommy. And when I say I'm sick of it, is, you know, it was kind of cool that they brought, in '89 when they toured again, they brought it back and they played the whole thing with all these special guests and everything. But since then, it's just become too much of a theatrical Broadway thing where they have all these other people sing on it. And I'm sick of hearing all that. If I get to hear Tommy, I just like listen to the studio album. I just like hear them do it with Pete and Roger singing all the songs. I think John sings a couple too. And it's just the 4-piece band. It doesn't have all this extra crap that they have on stage now. But of course they have all the classics on here from, you know, We're Not Gonna Take It, See Me Feel Me, Sparks is a great instrumental. And the story is actually somewhat coherent and you understand what they talk about. So yeah, it's one of those classic albums that everyone has to hear at some point. 1 and 2, I mean, I could go back and forth about, which is the best here and there. I'm going to put Who's Next at number 2, only because there's a couple songs on here. The Song Is Over and Getting in Tune that I'm just not that crazy about. I kind of skip over those a lot. But of course, Bob O'Reilly, Bargain, My Wife, Getting in Tune is just Going Mobile and Behind Blue Eyes. And then, of course, it ends with Won't Get Fooled Again. It's funny how, like, The Who, at least during the 80s and 90s, were right up there with the big, Beatles and Stones. Now they're not talked about as much. I think Led Zeppelin has replaced them as sort of like being in the big three of all-time classic bands. And even on the VC or music-related YouTube channels, I don't hear a lot of people talk about The Who. I hear, when they come out with a reissue or something, they do. But in general, they don't mention them just as much as the Stones, the Beatles, and now the Kinks are well talked about as well, which they should be. I particularly like this one from the 90s because it has all the singles that were released at the time, like Pure and Easy, Water, Naked Eye, Too Much of Anything, I Don't Even Know Myself. These songs, I think, are better than some of them that actually ended up on the album. So if you included those songs, I think this could be number 1, but just the basic album that everybody knows, the 9 tracks, I'm putting it at number 2. And then, of course, number 1 to me is their absolute best, Quadrophenia, double album, Just Like Tommy. Probably their overall heaviest album. I think it's their best produced album, best written. Story itself, there's not much of the story. It's just basically about early life as a mod or a rocker, the sort of two rivals in England. But always liked Seeing Sand, The Real Me, Punk and the Godfather. Even the songs that aren't well known, like Dr. Jimmy, are all great. And of course, it has Love Reign Over Me, which was been used in commercials. So probably the biggest song on here. So that's my number 1. And a lot of people will say overall that their best album is probably Live at Leeds, and I would tend to agree. I mean, it just sounds unbelievable. It's, along with Quadrophenia, this is their heaviest album, probably. His guitar sound is great on here. If you have the original vinyl, you get a bunch of posters and paraphernalia in here. It's pretty cool. It only has 5 songs, though, but I would definitely recommend getting the 90s CDs release, which has all the extra songs, except for the Tommy performance, which they put out later on. But it's got Heaven and Hell, Can't Explain, Tattoo, Substitute, which I think is on the original. A Quick One is on here. This is one of the best sounding CDs. I mean, when you put this on, it just fills the room. Whoever mastered this did an awesome job on it. So I highly recommend getting that. And of course, you got to get some of the compilations to get all the tracks. So this one, Meaty Beaty Big and Bouncy, this is one of their first albums I had. I got it on cassette back in the 80s. And it's got all of their 60s singles. I Can't Explain, Kids Are All Right, Happy Jack, I Can See for Miles, Pictures of Lily. So like I said, there's so many songs that they had that weren't on albums that were actually their most well-known songs. So definitely would recommend getting that. And here's the sort of the 70s version of that, Odds and Sods, which has the big well-known songs on here are probably Long Live Rock, The Seeker, Heaven and Hell. It's got some of the songs that were put on the CDs in the 90s. Postcard is on here. Too Much of Anything, Glow Girl. This was the reissue, which I think has a slightly different track order than the 90s reissue. So it's hard to keep up sometimes. And then finally, this is one of my favorites from them. Kids Are All Right. It's the soundtrack to the movie. And you know, this is another one. It comes with a huge booklet, and this is one of the first ones I had. Also, it's got some live TV performances and studio tracks. Once it goes back and forth, and they actually recorded a performance, which you've probably seen the videos of Won't Get Fooled Again, Baba O'Reilly. It was the last performance with Keith Moon, and a couple of live tracks are on here. And again, this was one of the first albums I heard from them. And my cousin had this on cassette, and I dubbed it and listened to it almost every day for a whole summer. So that's why I highly recommend that. Other than that, they also have one box set as far as compilations, but most of that stuff has been released on the subsequent CD releases, so it makes it sort of obsolete. And they put out some super deluxe box sets of Who's Next and what's that one? Who Sell Out. And I find most of those tracks though are just either alternate takes or just like mono versions of this and that. Not a whole lot of unreleased songs per se. I'd recommend getting the Pete Townshend, some of the Pete Townshend albums too. I did a ranking of his albums earlier, a couple years ago, if you want to look up that video. But the Scoop albums, if you ever pick those up, they all have demos, a lot of these Who songs. And, you know, the arrangements are pretty much very, very similar, except there's Pete on vocals. And it's one thing I think, too, over the years, I've, you know, prefer Pete's vocals to Roger's, which has become very gruff and I don't know. But I would always almost want to hear Pete sing like almost all of these songs at some point if there's a version of that. So anyway, if you like these videos, please like and subscribe. And if you want to give me your ranking or maybe your top 5, just let me know. All right, thanks.